October 12, 1944. Monte Cassino, Italy. The air inside the field hospital smelled like copper and gangrene. Not the clean, antiseptic smell of the hospital back in Baltimore where I'd trained, but something older, something that clung to your lungs and refused to leave. Blood, sulfur, wet canvas. The kind of smell that makes you understand why the ancient Greeks thought death had a scent. My name is Captain Daniel Hartwell. I am 32 years old. Chief Surgeon of the 95th Evacuation Hospital, 3rd Platoon. Before the war, I delivered babies and removed appendixes in a quiet suburb where the biggest emergency was Mrs. Henderson's gallstones. Now I stand in a converted monastery with stone walls that have witnessed 8 centuries of prayer, watching boys bleed out on litters because we've run out of plasma. The monastery sat on a hillside overlooking the Rapido River Valley. Through the glassless windows, I could see the skeletal remains of the abbey on Monte Cassino, bombed to rubble 6 months earlier. Our hospital occupied what remained of the lower buildings, stone structures the bombardment had somehow spared. The Allies had finally pushed through, but the cost hung in every corner of this place. 18 operating tables, 47 nurses and medics, 3 surgeons including myself. We'd been running non-stop for 11 days since the breakthrough at the Gothic Line. The wounded came down from the mountains in waves, strapped to mules, carried by stretcher bearers, sometimes crawling on their own. Every one of them looked at you with the same question in their eyes. Am I going to die here? I pressed my palms against the stone wall, feeling the cold seep through. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. Not from fear, not anymore. From exhaustion that went bone deep. Lieutenant Sarah Brennan, my head nurse, said I'd been operating for 16 hours straight. I didn't remember half of it. Time had become meaningless, measured only in the intervals between screams. Captain Hartwell. Sarah's voice cut through my fog. She stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the dim lantern light from the ward. Her uniform was stained dark up to the elbows. We've got incoming. Heavy. Maybe 40 liters. I turned from the window. Ours? Mixed. Infantry from the 34th Division. But sir, she hesitated. MPs are bringing in German prisoners from the Kesselring line. Wounded. 16 of them. The trembling in my hands stopped. Not because I'd found calm, but because something cold had replaced the exhaustion. Germans. Here. In my hospital. I'd seen what German artillery did to American boys. I'd pulled shrapnel from chests, amputated legs torn apart by S-mines, held intestines inside abdominal cavities while boys called for their mothers. 2 days ago, Private James Kowalski died in my arms because a German sniper had shot him through the liver. He was 19 years old. He'd shown me a picture of his girlfriend before the morphine took him under. Betsy. Her name was Betsy. How many of ours are critical? I asked. Sarah's jaw tightened. 23. Maybe more. Won't know until we triage. Get the German prisoners set up in the East Wing, away from our boys. I don't want them seeing each other. Captain, the East Wing has... I know what the East Wing has. My voice came out sharper than I intended. The East Wing had the best ventilation, the most space, the fewest leaks when it rained. It also had the morphine stores and the remaining plasma. Just do it, Lieutenant. She held my gaze for a moment, longer than protocol allowed. Sarah had been with me since North Africa. She'd seen me crack 3 ribs doing chest compressions on a kid who died anyway. She'd watched me weep in the supply tent after we lost 7 men in one night. She knew when I was making decisions from exhaustion instead of judgment. But she didn't argue. She never did. She just nodded and disappeared into the chaos. I walked through the main ward, between rows of cots where American soldiers lay in various states of ruin. Some slept, some stared at the ceiling with hollow eyes. Some would be dead by morning, and they knew it. You could always tell which ones knew. They had this look, this terrible acceptance. Corporal Eddie Martinez sat propped against the wall, bandages wrapped around his head where his left eye used to be. He'd been a baseball player before the war, full scholarship to UCLA. Now he watched me pass with his remaining eye, and I saw the question there. The same question they all had. Did I do this for nothing? I didn't have an answer for him. The main operating theater occupied what had once been the monastery's refectory, long, narrow, with vaulted ceilings that caught the sound of screams and bounced them back. My surgical table stood in the center, a wooden door laid across two sawhorses, covered with a rubber sheet. Not exactly Johns Hopkins standards. Dr. Emil Reinhardt, my assistant surgeon, was already working on a soldier with his abdomen laid open. Emil was 61, too old for the draft, but he'd volunteered anyway after his son died at Normandy. He operated with the precision of a watchmaker, never rushed, never careless. He'd forgotten more about surgery than I'd ever learn. Daniel? He didn't look up from the peritoneum he was repairing. I heard about the Germans. Word travels fast. It always does in places like this. He tied off a bleeder with practiced efficiency. What are you going to do? Treat them. What else can I do? The Geneva Convention is clear. The Geneva Convention is a piece of paper, Daniel. What's in your heart is something else entirely. I didn't answer. I couldn't, because Emil was right, and we both knew it. The wounded arrived just after midnight. The American soldiers came first, carried in on stretchers by medics whose faces had gone blank with shock. Battle fatigue, they called it. I called it the natural, human response to watching your friends die in a ditch. The medics moved mechanically, dropping off their cargo and heading back out into the dark to find more. I moved down the line, doing rapid triage. This one lives, this one might live, this one. God help him, there's nothing I can do. You learn to make those decisions in seconds. You have to. Hesitation kills. Private First Class Tommy Donovan, sucking chest wound, 19 years old. Blonde hair matted with blood and mud. He grabbed my wrist as I passed, his grip surprisingly strong. Doc, am I gonna make it? I looked at the hole in his chest and heard the wet whistle of air passing through tissue. Pneumothorax. Probably hemothorax too. Without immediate surgery, he'd drown in his own blood within the hour. You're going to be fine, son. We'll get you fixed up. The lie came easily now. Too easily. Just breathe for me, nice and slow. Sarah appeared at my elbow. Captain, the Germans are in the East Wing, 16 prisoners. The MP sergeant wants to know your orders. I tagged Tommy's jacket with red tape. Emergency surgery required. Tell the sergeant to post guards and wait. We'll get to them when we can. Sir, 3 of them are critical, maybe more. The MPs did field dressing, but, Lieutenant, I turned to face her. Our boys come first. Always. Is that understood? She met my eyes with that same measuring look. Understood, sir. But I saw the doubt there. Sarah had been a missionary before the war, working in a hospital in Shanghai. She'd told me once that suffering had no nationality, that pain spoke a universal language. I agreed with her then. Sitting in a clean hospital stateside, it was easy to believe in universal human dignity. Here, covered in American blood, it was a lot harder. I worked on Tommy first, cut him open right there on the table, no time for anesthesia except a shot of morphine that probably wouldn't do much. He screamed when the scalpel went in. They always do. The sound echoed off the vaulted ceiling, mixing with the rain that had started to fall, pattering against the stone. His lung was shredded. Fragments of his own ribs had torn through the tissue like shrapnel. I worked by lantern light, my hands moving automatically, doing what they'd been trained to do. Clamp, cut, suture, keep him breathing, keep the blood inside. Emil worked beside me on another table, repairing a shattered femur. The soldier under his hands was unconscious, which was a mercy. You don't want to be awake when someone's putting your leg back together with metal pins. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time had stopped meaning anything. Tommy survived the surgery. Barely. We moved him to recovery, and I went to the next table, and the next, and the next. Blood soaked through my apron and my shirt underneath. My back ached from standing hunched over the table. My eyes burned from the smoke of the lanterns. Somewhere around 0300 hours, Sarah found me again. "Captain." Her voice was tight. "You need to come to the East Wing. Now." I was elbow deep in a leg amputation. "I'm in the middle of—" "Sir. Please." Something in her tone made me look up. Sarah Brennan didn't rattle easily. She'd held soldiers down during amputations without anesthesia. She'd walked through artillery fire to reach wounded men. Whatever was happening in the East Wing, it was bad enough to shake her. I let Emil take over the amputation and followed Sarah through the dark corridors of the monastery. The rain had intensified, drumming against the roof. Water dripped through cracks in the stone ceiling, forming puddles on the floor that reflected our lamplight. The East Wing was quieter than the main ward. The German prisoners lay on cots arranged along both walls, guarded by 2 MPs who looked like they hadn't slept in a week. The prisoners wore the gray-green uniforms of the Wehrmacht, most torn and bloody. Some watched us approach with fearful eyes, others lay unconscious, or dying. At the far end of the ward, a German medic knelt beside one of the cots. He was young, maybe 25, with wire-rimmed spectacles and thin fingers. His uniform identified him as a sanitator, the German equivalent of a combat medic. He looked up as we approached, and I saw the desperation in his face. "Bitte," he said. "Please, he is dying." The soldier on the cot couldn't have been more than 17. His face was gray, lips blue, breathing shallow and rapid. Someone had bandaged his abdomen, but blood had soaked through, spreading across his midsection like a map of his ending. I didn't need to examine him to know what had happened. Abdominal wound, probably perforated bowel. Without surgery, he'd die of septic shock within hours. With surgery, maybe he'd live. The German medic grabbed my arm. His English was broken but clear enough. "You are a doctor, yes? Can you help?" I looked at the dying boy on the cot. Then I looked back toward the main ward, where Tommy Donovan lay recovering from surgery, where 22 other American soldiers waited for my attention, boys who'd fought for the same flag I served, who'd trusted me to save them first. The German medic's grip tightened on my arm. "Please." "He has. How do you say? Die, Mother. She waits for him. Please." They all have mothers, I thought. Every single one of them. Sarah stood beside me, waiting for my decision. The MPs watched. The conscious prisoners watched. Even the unconscious ones seemed to be waiting, as if the whole war had paused for this single moment. I pulled my arm free from the German medic's grip. "Get him to surgery," I said. Sarah's hand caught my elbow as I turned to leave. "Captain, we still have 11 Americans waiting for surgery. 3 of them are critical." "I know." "Do you?" Her voice dropped to barely a whisper, but it cut through me like a scalpel. "Because Sergeant Morrison has a tension pneumothorax that's going to kill him in the next hour. Private Chen has internal bleeding we haven't even assessed yet, and you're about to spend 2 hours operating on the enemy." I looked at the German boy on the cot. His breathing had become more labored, each breath a visible struggle. His eyes were closed, but I could see the muscles in his jaw working, fighting through pain that morphine couldn't touch. "Get him ready," I said again. The German medic understood before Sarah did. He started barking orders in German to the other prisoners who could move. They lifted their dying comrade carefully, their movements efficient despite their injuries. These men had done this before, on battlefields I didn't want to imagine. I walked back to the operating theater ahead of them, my mind already running through the procedure. Exploratory laparotomy. Open him up, find the bleeder, repair what I could. Standard enough in theory. In practice, with limited supplies and a patient already in shock, the survival rate was maybe 30%. Emil looked up from the soldier he was working on as I entered. "Daniel, what are you doing?" "Emergency surgery. German prisoner. Abdominal wound." His hands paused mid-suture. "You're not serious." "Do I look like I'm joking?" "We have Americans dying in the next room." "I know." I moved to the sink, scrubbing blood off my hands and forearms. The water ran red, then pink, then clear. My reflection in the steel basin looked like a stranger. Sunken eyes, 3 days of beard growth, blood spattered across my face that I hadn't noticed until now. Then why? Emil's voice carried no judgment, only genuine confusion. Because I took an oath. First, do no harm. It didn't come with a nationality clause. Daniel, that oath was written for peacetime. This is war. Different rules. Then maybe the rules are wrong. The German prisoners brought their comrade in and laid him on my table. Up close, under the harsh lantern light, he looked even younger. Smooth cheeks that barely needed shaving. A small scar on his chin, probably from childhood. In his breast pocket, I could see the corner of a photograph, the paper stained with blood. The German medic stood beside the table, refusing to leave. I assist. I speak English. I will help. I should have refused, should have had the MPs remove him. But something in his eyes, the same desperate competence I saw in Sarah's face every day, made me nod. What's your name? Klaus. Klaus Fischer. Ich bin Sanitator. Medizinisch Korpsmann. All right, Klaus. You're going to help me keep him alive. What's his name? Friedrich. Friedrich Bauer. He was, student. Mathematics. Klaus's voice cracked. He should not be here. None of us should be here. I didn't respond to that. Couldn't. Because he was right, and what good did being right do for any of us? We got Friedrich under what passed for anesthesia, a careful mixture of ether and morphine that would hopefully keep him unconscious without killing him. Klaus held the ether mask while Sarah assisted me, her movements precise despite the tension radiating from her like heat. I made the incision. The scalpel parted skin, fat, muscle. Friedrich's abdomen opened like a door to a nightmare. Blood welled up immediately, dark and thick. Perforated bowel, just as I'd suspected, but worse than I'd hoped. The bullet had torn through his intestines in 3 places, spreading fecal matter throughout his peritoneal cavity. Jesus, I breathed. Klaus leaned closer, peering into the wound. His face went pale, but his hands remained steady on the ether mask. Whatever else he was a professional. Can you fix it? He asked quietly. I don't know. I started working. Clamp here, clamp there, suction to clear the blood. Sarah anticipated my needs without being asked, handing me instruments a second before I requested them. We'd worked together long enough that our movements had become a kind of dance, each step choreographed by necessity. The perforations were worse than they'd looked at first. Ragged edges, tissue already starting to necrotize. Each repair had to be perfect, or the sutures would pull through, and Friedrich would die anyway, drowning in his own waste. I lost track of time. The world narrowed to the circle of light around the operating table, to the rhythmic hiss of Friedrich's breathing, to the delicate work of putting a human being back together. Somewhere in the middle of the surgery, I heard voices from the main ward, raised voices, shouting, then a scream that cut through everything else, raw and agonized. Sarah's hands faltered for just a second. She looked at me, and I saw the question in her eyes. That's one of ours. Shouldn't you be there? Keep pressure on that bleeder, I said, not looking up. She did, but I felt her judgment, heavy as stone. Emil appeared in the doorway 20 minutes later. His apron was soaked with blood. His face was gray. Daniel, Private Chen just died. Internal bleeding. We couldn't control it without you. My hands paused, suture needles halfway through a bowel repair. Chen from San Francisco? The kid who wanted to be a teacher? Yes. I could picture him. I am 21 years old. Round face. Always smiling, even after we'd told him he was being shipped to the front. He'd shown me a letter from his little sister, asking when he was coming home. I'd told him soon. I'd lied. If you'd been there, Emil started. If I'd been there, maybe I could have saved him, or maybe he would have died anyway. We'll never know. Daniel, get out, Emil. Please, just get out. He left. The silence that followed was worse than the shouting. I went back to work on Friedrich. Each suture felt like a small betrayal, each careful knot tied with American blood on my hands. But I couldn't stop. Wouldn't stop. Because stopping meant accepting that some lives mattered more than others based on which uniform they wore. And if I accepted that, what would I become? 3 hours after I started, I tied the final suture and stepped back from the table. Friedrich Bauer, a 17-year-old mathematics student from somewhere in Germany, would probably live. The infection risk was high, but he was young and strong. With antibiotics and careful monitoring, he'd survive to see another day. In the main ward, Private Robert Chen from San Francisco would never teach again, would never write another letter to his sister. I would never go home. Klaus looked at me across the table, his eyes red behind his wire-rimmed spectacles. "Thank you," he whispered. "Danke. Thank you for his life." I wanted to hit him. I wanted to scream that I'd just traded an American boy's life for a German's. Wanted to ask him if he thought that was fair, if he thought that was justice. Instead, I just nodded and walked away. I found Sarah in the supply room, sitting on a crate of bandages with her head in her hands. She didn't look up when I entered. "How many did we lose while I was operating?" I asked. "2. Chen and Morrison. Morrison's pneumothorax collapsed both lungs by the time we got to him." She raised her head, and I saw tears tracking through the blood spatter on her cheeks. "He called for you, Captain. He asked where you were." The words hit like shrapnel. I leaned against the wall, suddenly too exhausted to stand on my own. "I made a choice, Sarah. I know you did. I watched you make it." She stood, wiping her face with the back of her hand. "I just need to understand why. Help me understand why that German boy's life was worth more than Morrison's, worth more than Chen's." "It wasn't worth more. That's the point. It wasn't worth more, but it wasn't worth less, either. Tell that to Morrison's wife. Tell that to Chen's little sister." "I can't." The admission came out as barely a whisper. "I can't tell them anything that would make this right. Nothing I say will bring them back. But Sarah, if I'd let Friedrich die when I could have saved him, what would that have made me? Human. It would have made you human, Daniel. Flawed and exhausted and trying to save your own people first. There's no shame in that. Isn't there?" I pushed off the wall, started pacing the small room. We tell ourselves we're the good guys. We're fighting for freedom, for justice, for all these noble causes. But if I start deciding who deserves to live based on their uniform, how am I any different from them? They started this war. Friedrich didn't start this war. He's 17 years old. He probably got drafted like our boys did, got shipped to Italy like our boys did, got shot in the gut like our boys do. What's his crime? Being born German? Sarah's jaw tightened. His crime is wearing that uniform, fighting for the Wehrmacht, for the Third Reich, for everything they represent. And if he had a choice, if he could have said no without getting shot by his own officers, do you think he would have chosen this? I gestured at the walls around us, the blood-soaked monastery full of dying men. Do you think any of them would choose this? I don't know, Daniel, but I know that every minute you spent saving him was a minute you didn't spend saving ours. And I know that Morrison and Chen paid the price for your conscience. The truth of it settled over me like a burial shroud. She was right. They'd paid. And I'd made them pay without asking, without giving them a choice. I need to check on the patients, I said quietly. I walked through the main ward first, 37 American soldiers in various states of recovery or decline. Tommy Donovan was awake, his chest rising and falling with the careful rhythm of repaired lungs. He'd live, maybe he'd even make it home. Eddie Martinez sat in the corner, still watching the world with his one remaining eye. The stump where Corporal Jenkins' leg used to be was healing clean, no infection yet. They were alive because I'd saved them. But Morrison and Chen were dead because I hadn't. The mathematics of triage always came down to impossible equations. In the East Wing, Friedrich lay unconscious but stable. His breathing was regular, his color better than it had been. Klaus sat beside his cot, still wearing his bloody uniform, his head bowed as if in prayer. He looked up as I approached. Will he live? If infection doesn't set in, if his sutures hold, if a lot of things go right, but yes, probably. Klaus stood, and for a moment I thought he might embrace me. Instead, he just extended his hand. I looked at it for a long moment. That hand had probably pulled a trigger, had probably thrown grenades, had probably killed American soldiers. I shook it. Why? Klaus asked. Why did you save him? You lose your own men. I hear them talking. I hear them say you should let us die. Because I'm a doctor. It's what I do. No. Klaus shook his head. Is more than that. In war, men forget what they are. They forget humanity. You remember. That is why. I wanted to tell him he was wrong, that I hadn't been thinking about humanity or morality or any of those grand concepts, that I'd just been too tired to make the hard choice, too weak to let a boy die when I could save him. But maybe that wasn't a weakness. Maybe that was the last shred of myself I was trying to hold on to. Your army, Klaus said quietly. They are winning the war. Everyone knows. In months, maybe years, it is over. You go home, yes? Back to America. Back to family. If I survive that long, you will survive. You are doctor. They need doctors. But me, Friedrich, all of us. He gestured at the ward full of German prisoners. We go to camps. We wait. We hope our families still live when we get home. If we get home. I'm sorry, I said, and I meant it. No, don't be sorry. You give Friedrich a chance. You give him life when you could choose death. In this war, in all this darkness, you choose life. That is something. He was wrong, though. I hadn't chosen life. I'd chosen to try. Sometimes that was all anyone could do. The rain stopped just before dawn. The sun rose over the mountains, painting the bombed remains of Monte Cassino in shades of gold and red that seemed obscene given what they illuminated. Ruins, graves, the residue of violence that would scar this landscape for generations. I stood outside the monastery, watching the light spread across the valley. Behind me, the wounded slept or died or hung suspended between the two. My hands had finally stopped shaking. Emil found me there as the sun cleared the mountains. I thought you should know, he said. Tommy Donovan woke up asking for you. I want to thank you for saving his life. I was just doing my job. Were you? Emil stood beside me, following my gaze across the valley. Because from where I stood, you did a lot more than that last night. You made impossible choices. You paid prices most men couldn't even calculate. I lost 2 soldiers. You saved dozens, including one you didn't have to save, one that most of us wouldn't have saved. He paused. Was it worth it? I thought about Friedrich, breathing steady in the east wing. Thought about Chen and Morrison, cold in the morgue tent. Thought about all the others I'd saved and all the ones I'd lost. The mathematics was never balanced. They never would. I don't know, I admitted. Ask me when the war's over. Maybe then I'll have an answer. And if you don't, then I guess I'll spend the rest of my life wondering. Emil nodded slowly. That's the price of the choice you made. You'll carry Morrison and Chen with you forever. But you'll also carry Friedrich. And maybe, when you're old and looking back on this, you'll understand which burden was heavier. He left me there as the morning brightened. Medics began moving among the wounded, changing dressings, administering morphine, the daily work of keeping broken men alive. Sarah emerged from the main ward, spotted me, and changed direction. She'd made her feelings clear. I couldn't blame her. But as I turned to go back, inside, I saw Klaus standing in the doorway of the east wing. He raised one hand, not quite a wave, not quite a salute, just an acknowledgement. 2 men on opposite sides of a war, connected by the fragile thread of a life I'd saved when maybe I shouldn't have. I raised my hand in return. The war would continue. More wounded would come. More impossible choices would present themselves in the blood-soaked hours between dusk and dawn. And I would keep making those choices, keep trying to hold on to something human in a place designed to strip humanity away. Because Klaus had been right about one thing. In war, men forget what they are. They forget the difference between necessary and needless cruelty. They forget that the enemy bleeds the same blood, fears the same darkness, calls for the same mother in their final moments. I couldn't stop the war. Couldn't bring back Morrison or Chen or any of the others I'd lost. But I could remember. I could hold on to the idea that every life on my operating table, American or German, deserved the same desperate attempt at salvation. Maybe that made me weak. Maybe it made me a bad officer, prioritizing philosophy over strategy. Or maybe it made me the last thing I wanted to be on a battlefield. Humans. 3 weeks later, Friedrich Bauer was well enough to be transferred to a POW camp. The infection I'd feared never materialized. His sutures held. He walked out of the monastery under his own power, escorted by MPs who probably couldn't understand why I stood watching. He saw me as they led him past, stopped, despite the MPs pulling at his arms, and in German-accented English, he said 4 words that would echo in my memory for the rest of my life. I will remember you. Then they took him away, and I never saw him again. But sometimes, in the dark hours when sleep won't come and old wounds ache with rain, I wonder if he kept that promise. I wonder if somewhere in Germany, an old man who should have died in Italy tells grandchildren about the American doctor who saved the enemy. I wonder if he understands what it costs me. I wonder if it was worth it.